What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I feature top inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Nathan Imperiale and Josh Shultz of NJI Media. I'm excited. Guys, I always like to mention other podcasts people should check out and episodes. And Lisa Larson-Kelly of Quantius, she works with big tech giants. I know you have a few that you work with, so we'll talk about that. And also, Todd Taskey is always a fan favorite among the top agency series, because he actually helps pair agencies with private equity, and he has a Second Bite podcast. So he has found that sometimes the agencies will make more on the second bite than they do off the first. And he talked about valuation and what he's seen in the agency industry. So that's a good one. Also, Adee Clevitt, she does SOPs for companies and like an easy button. And we geek down on all the productivity and tech tools we like to use because we like to be as productive as possible. So that's always, I go back and listen to that one because I, always like to see it. Am I implementing all the stuff that she recommended or not? So that and many more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do accountability, strategy, and the full execution and production behind the scene. We call ourselves kind of the magic elves that work in the background to make sure everything works and is happening, and it makes it look seamless for the host. So, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way to do that than profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. Hopefully they make some more connections through the podcast as well. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce today, we have both Nathan Imperiale and Josh Shultz. They're co-CEOs of NJI Media, and we'll talk a little bit more about the co-CEO thing. And they founded this back in 2007, and their insider knowledge of Capitol Hill and the White House is an asset when shaping campaigns and compelling digital assets. Josh, I know, has guided the U.S. House of Representatives and the NRCC in the digital age, and they both specialize in strategic communications, brand development, web design, and often with public policy or commerce objectives. And they've helped companies such as Home Depot, Ventec Life Systems, and General Motors, Intuit, C-SPAN, and many, many more. Thanks, both of you, for joining me.
Thanks for having us. That was the nicest introduction I've ever gotten to anything. So I appreciate that.
Maybe it's because Josh has been introducing you.
That's true. But if I would also introduce Nathan as an elf. I think and I'm more like the easy button. So
I gotcha. So just before we get started, tell people about NJI Media and what you do.
Yeah. I'll jump in before Josh does because I like to do that. We are a creative agency at heart, but we have a specialization in public affairs and public policy, which makes us unique. At least to me, it feels unique. We work with organizations across the globe, and like you said, Home Depot, Intuit, Meta, and dozens of others to help them deal with complex public affairs challenges, both here in the U.S. and abroad. Everything from helping them think through how to best tell the story of their economic impact to what their role is in promoting female entrepreneurs and everything in between. We do some really, really exciting and interesting work. And like I said, I think we're a unique snowflake in a certain regard when it comes to public affairs.
What issues do people come to you with?
That's a great question. I mean, it kind of runs a gamut a little bit. A lot of them, it's a wonky, complex, or just kind of dense policy issue that these corporations or trade associations are having. And they're not able to resonate with consumers and the public at large. And if it's something that is basically driven by legislation that might change, or something that's impacting the success of the companies because there is a regulation that needs to be tweaked, sometimes it's hard to explain the complexities of that public policy. And so what they ask us to do is basically distill it in a meaningful way and create content solutions that are fully orchestrated and beautifully crafted that we can then deliver back to the public so they better understand it. So we're able to kind of distill a lot of the complexity that they have, whether it be a white paper or a report or other data, and serve it up in a meaningful way so people better understand it.
It seems like there's just so many moving pieces with what you do and so much complexity that I would probably run from this personally. Like, it just seems difficult. How did you get into this type of work?
By accident.
I
mean, Nathan and I both cut our teeth on Capitol Hill, effectively doing the same thing on the early days of digital when we were called new media experts. And he was doing it in official capacity. I was doing it more in the political committee capacity.
I was doing it better.
Nathan was doing it, well, actually slightly better. And that's so true. Anyway, so basically what we were doing was building websites. This is on the onset of blogs and trying to communicate effectively with blogs and creating graphics that worked and trying to impact on social platforms, albeit early on Facebook and Twitter, and then doing video production. And Nathan had started the LLC, and again, in an official capacity, and essentially spun it up overnight to make things easier to hire a bigger team. And then one evening asked if I wanted to join his team. At the time, it wasn't a great fit because I was chasing my then girlfriend, now fiance, now wife, to Chicago. But it was a unique ask of him because we were doing the same thing, and there weren't really many shops in DC doing it well. Nathan was frustrated because the level of creative that he was getting from his vendors wasn't good. I was frustrated because the level of customer service I was getting wasn't great, and his focus in college, and he's a great designer and video producer, was exceptional creative, and mine was more kind of connecting people and making sure that we're doing right by our clients. So I was excited about the prospect, bummed out we couldn't do it. And then he called me a week later and said, look, our designers in Thailand, our web team is going to be stationed in Atlanta for now. There's no reason you can't help me run this out of Chicago. And there we were. So it was good timing, but we were effectively doing the same thing.
So, Nathan, did it take convincing him that he could work virtually? Originally, he was thinking he'd have to be stationed where you were.
Definitely. It was, well before remote working was popular, and Josh felt like he wasn't going to be able to be effective, at least at first, working from Chicago when our business was really based in DC, or the most of our clients were at that point. But we quickly realized that our network expanded well beyond DC, and our business has grown beyond DC. And that happened relatively quickly. So it's been an asset to have team members stationed all over the place. Obviously, at first we started small in the US, but now we've got a 65 plus person team and based all over the world. So
I thought he was going to say it was an asset to have Josh on the team, but that's not where he was going.
No, that actually, I convinced you to come on board, and I'm still wondering whether or not that was a good decision.
16 years later.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about attracting top talent and how you attract top talent, and start with Josh. Actually, was there any other convincing that you needed to do? I mean, outside of the location wise, because Josh, you could have gone off, done your own thing. There was some dialogue of why you thought it was a good idea to team up beyond the location part. What other convincing did you have to do, or what else was on the table?
I mean, anybody would tell you Nathan can convince anybody to do anything. So I was duped a little bit. But honestly, he's brilliant at what he does. And it was advantageous because we both were doing essentially the same thing. but concentrating on kind of two different sides of the business. Again, I was more focused on people management and customer and client service, and he was focused on kind of pushing the limits of creative, whether it be a website design or video production. So that alone was a good match. He had already had a small team, which I met, and they're all exceptional humans. And they're just, Nathan will say this, he just wants to work with nice people. We want to hire people who are a good fit for our family. We want our partners and other vendors that we work alongside and hire to be just good people. And if you can work alongside people who you love showing up to work with each day, the rest will kind of take care of itself. And fortunately, we've been lucky 16 years later that we've been able to do that.
What do you do now to attract top talent?
Yeah, it's evolved. It's definitely changed over the last 16 years. Working with a progressive young team that's excited about great creative, we need to provide them with the work that keeps them going and excited on a day-to-day basis. So, our job, at least for Josh and I, is to make sure that the work that we're providing and being able to showcase to potential new team members is exciting enough to keep them going. And I think that we've done that, but we've put a huge focus on growing a diverse team that's built up of exceptional individuals. We spend a lot of time going through a really thorough interview process to make sure that everybody that we bring onto the team is going to fit well with the team that we already have. Like Josh said, I've put a special star next to the goal of just liking the people that we go to work with every day. And that goes for our clients as well. And just as important as it is for the work to be great that our team is working on, it's also important for them to be working with clients that they enjoy working with. And so we put just as much emphasis on making sure that our clients are a good fit for us. And that's incredibly important to Josh and I.
Yeah, I mean, 16 years later, we have an advantage. We can be a little pickier in terms of who we're able to hire, which is a really good place to be as a company. And we have a portfolio that backs up our work and a culture that really aligns. We're an LGBT owned company, and we have the luxury of being able to be a little bit more picky with who comes on board. And Nathan will say often, that allows us the advantage of making sure that we hire people smarter than Nathan and I, which, let me tell you, is a very low bar, but that's allowed us to grow as a company. And our entire team is exceptional. Everybody, and Nathan and I talk about this all the time, how we got so lucky having such a team who not only cares about each other, but genuinely cares about the work and the clients and how to push ourselves and how to challenge the status quo each day. It's quite lovely going to work each day with that kind of environment surrounding you.
I love to know what's is one or two things that's baked into the interview process to make sure that you hire right. Hiring's not easy. And I just want to point out, if someone's listening to the audio, if you're watching the video part, you can see I'm on NJImedia.com and the careers page. I always like to look at, you can kind of get a sense of people's companies from how they list out and how they describe their core values here. And you'll see that why NJI here. We love what we do. And there's just like a sense of humor to what you guys have in here. There's flexible, there's interesting people, vacation bonus, community opportunity, wellness. And then there's a office sword swallowing performance. So maybe
that's amazing.
What is that about?
Yeah, we do a lot of event production. And Nathan is brilliant at hosting events. And we've been fortunate enough to host 3 of them. We have a really old former grain warehouse of an office. And we've hosted 3 events for clients in our team, and each of those have included a sword swallower and a fire breather. So that's been a lot of fun. But to kind of touch back on your question, what we ask of people, Nathan and I let others ask the good questions. What is your biggest failure, and all those typical questions. I want to know more about whether or not I connect with that person and how they think. One of the questions we'll ask is, if you woke up one morning and there was an elephant in your backyard, what would you do? And it's fun to hear people's answers. Well, first, there's some people that would say, well, the first thing I would do is, document it and take a picture. Then I'd call animal control. And so those are, all right, this would be a good project manager. And then there's
Exactly.
people that are like, well, I'd go outside and try to climb it and ride it. I've always wanted to. And so you learn a lot about a person. Or we ask, how many tennis balls can you fit in a limousine? And it's fun to watch people react. And then some people were like, well, can I ask some clarifying questions? How big is a limousine? And it's just like interesting to kind of see people react in a way. I've asked them if they've ever jumped from a moving train, which generally gets a strange response, or if they've ever been stuck in an elevator. And if so, how do they handle it? So we try to have a little bit more fun. And by the time they get to us, the decision is essentially kind of already made by people way more important than we are, but that's a good way to really get to know somebody before you hire them.
Yeah, I love those. That's really interesting. Those thought-provoking questions. They're really,
now I've
you learn the
spoiled all of the
personality.
questions for future interviews. But yeah.
Hey, listen, if they took the time
to
to watch this interview and learn more, maybe they
That's
deserve
true.
to
A great
have
point.
that edge on people.
Bingo.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Talk about the co-CEO thing for a second.
We were warned that was a bad idea. The number of people who said like you really shouldn't do that was pretty long, including some of the business consultants that we've worked with and other executives that we have as mentors. But essentially, since day one, Josh and I have been operating as co-owners of the company, and despite the fact that it's my initials, unfortunately, on the door, because I had to create the LLC very quickly and couldn't be more creative than using my initials. The two of us have a way, or have had a way over the last 16 years of working collaboratively on everything. And most decisions that we make, we discuss in one way or another. Sometimes it's a quick banter back and forth. Other times it's a micro conversation where we mention something and want to just get some quick feedback. But that constant level of communication and trust in each other is sort of been at the backbone. If you haven't noticed, Josh and I also have a pretty good, healthy banter between us, and that happens all day, every day. It emanates to our team. Our team knows that, when we have a feeling about something or we don't like what the other has done or said, we'll say something quippy. We mean it lovingly, but we move, quickly, and we recognize, like a married couple, I can look at Josh and I can tell you how he's feeling without him opening his mouth, and vice versa. The number of times a week that Josh is like, yeah, you said yes to that, but I can tell what you really meant is no. That sounds like a terrible idea. So, I think that we've been really, really lucky. I don't think that this is a good model for a lot of people. And I think we spent a lot of time over the last 16 years figuring out how to best manage the team between the two of us. And we've sort of fit into two very good grooves that, Josh is really good at the operational side of our business, understands and wants to better understand our efficiencies and our inefficiencies and how we're better, or how we can better service our clients. I want to make sure that creatively we're thinking, beyond the next 10 steps. We're looking at ways that we can bring our clients that wow factor, and ensure that our agency is seen at the top of our game consistently. And so those two overlap, but we also do a pretty good job at sticking with our strengths and then giving each other feedback. and just being consistently open and honest with each other about just about everything.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd add is, and Nathan nailed it. First time
First time for everything.
Yeah. It allows, I mean, it honestly, it allows thoughtful decision making, which results in better outcomes, because we each have our unique perspective on something. And Nathan nailed it. Like, if you could summarize our relationship, it's just always been collaborative. And I think the look, we're not going to go on a road show and teach a master class in co-CEOing. But I do feel like we're doing a pretty darn good job of it. And part of the reason is there's also enhanced accountability, which is huge when you're running a global agency. If you think you know the answer to everything, you're just wrong. And quite frankly, some CEOs feel like they're on an island. Sure, they can have strong leadership teams, but at the end of the day, the decision is on their shoulders. And like Nathan said, we basically been co-CEOing for 15 years. But we've been able to do that in a way that really works well for us. And on the flip side, it also helps with work-life balance when you have CEOs sharing the workload, and that's huge for both of us. And our team knows that, to balance work and our personal life, which we want our team to do, and reduce the stress and help the mental health aspect of what we do, because what we do is not easy. That allows Nathan to lean in more and I can unplug, and vice versa, which is great.
I want to talk about going international, right? You start off domestic. What were some of the good and some of the challenges with going international?
How many hours do you have?
It's a whole other podcast. For me, it's been the best decision we ever made, given the fact that we have this sort of uniqueness in our qualities about being a creative agency focused on public affairs and public policy here in the U.S. That gave us, a calling card that was unique here. It's even more unique on an international scale. The sort of the political background that we have in understanding how governments work, how government leaders and those that work around them and influence them operate is relatively unique. And as we moved from working in government in the U.S. to working for and alongside organizations that have real policy issues that need to be heard and need to be brought to the forefront. Our background as an agency has really sort of allowed us to flourish, especially in the European market, being based out of London, and then expanding into Singapore on a smaller scale. But from looking at the future, we see a huge level of potential there, working with corporations and issue advocacy or trade groups that have major policy issues that span the globe. And in the UK, we had to spin up another business, and it's a subsidiary of NJI. But the jumps you have to make in order to do that, and the accounting and the management of team members and payroll and benefits is just entirely different than it is in the US. And so, God bless our finance team and our operations team. Sarah Fritz, who's our director of finance or SVP of finance, really was put to task in opening up the various entities internationally, which was no easy haul. And without the infrastructure that we had in place already, it would have been just nearly insurmountable. It was not an easy thing to do. And I don't think we really knew that going into it. We thought, we're just going to open up an LLC like we did in the US, and we'll just start, we'll find a payroll provider.
Yeah, we just need an office and a mailbox. How hard is it?
Yeah, exactly. We'll be good. No problem. Start hiring people. Singapore, completely different animal as well. We set up a company, and there are rules and regulations that force you to do things like have an outside auditor review your data security policies. That alone costs tens of thousands of dollars. and things like that. We went into it knowing that there were going to be costs and hoops that we had to jump through, but there were some nuances there that made it particularly interesting. And then setting up international bank accounts, very, very different. You don't just go online and go to Bank of America and within 5 minutes open a checking and savings account. You have got to go through a very significant screening process, especially in the UK. And ultimately, we ended up having a fabulous relationship with JP Morgan private bank, and the doors that they opened for us on the finance scale were tremendous, and that really streamlined the process. But it took a while for us to recognize that was the direction we should have gone through on day one. So I would say best decision we've ever made. A lot of work getting to where we are.
I'm curious what prompted the expansion. Was it a client inquiry? I mean, I like talking about this global conversation a little bit, because at least I can speak for myself. I feel like can be narrow-minded and just think US, right? And there's a whole world out there, right? From an abundance mentality, just that global thinking and expansion is huge. So I just like this conversation, and that you kind of ventured into these different countries. What prompted the expansion? I'm sure you didn't like throw a dart at a map. You're like, I think we should go to Singapore.
Real
close enough.
Actually, that's next. That would be a lot of fun.
I don't want to do all the talking, but I'll just quickly say that my rule of thumb for business, and I come from a long line. My grandparents were entrepreneurs and started businesses, and I learned early that having an anchor client that could help or pay all the bills up front when opening your doors is pretty critical to having a well-balanced life and lower anxiety when starting a business, because you're not putting everything on the line. You know that you have something as a backstop. And the same thing happened for us in the UK, in our expansion into Europe, and the same thing in Singapore. We had clients that we were working with, in both cases, that were US based, that wanted our work to focus more internationally. And we were probably the only agency that they were working with that was willing to sort of make a leap, and put resources on the ground internationally. Josh, I think, thought I was crazy. I came out of a meeting. I think I was in London meeting with our client there, and we were talking about the budget for the upcoming year. And I walked out of the meeting and I called Josh and I said, so I just committed to, if the client gives us X amount of budget for next year, we'll open an office in London. And we did not go into the meeting thinking that was going to be the case. And then the very next day, we got the green light, budget approved. And so we quickly worked to open an office and hire team members on the ground. We moved some team members from the US there to help open the office and make sure that the NJI brand was carried over from some emissaries in our DC based office. And then COVID hit, which was another story altogether. But that really impacted how things got jump started in the UK.
Talk about Intuit and what you did with Intuit.
That's love Intuit. I'll back up, and what I'll say about Intuit is a lot of our business, because Nathan and I have built the business on relationships and referrals, because we came from Capitol Hill. We worked with really smart individuals on both sides of the aisle, and then those individuals obviously leave Capitol Hill and they go to work at agencies and think tanks and in wonderful places. And because we were basically the one-stop shop for all the digital for them for years, they're like, what do we do? I have no idea where to start. And sometimes we're just that warm blanket and we give them advice. And then other times we're able to work with them. In this case, Intuit was a relationship brought to us by a wonderful human being, Paul Lindsay, who I worked with on Capitol Hill. We worked with him at Pharma, a trade association that represents the pharmaceutical industry here in DC. And then we also knew Daniel Eubanks, who worked at Intuit, who is one of the nicest people we've ever worked with. And they came to us and said, hey, Intuit is opening up a kind of a corporate affairs arm. They didn't really focus much on public policy. Paul did a really good job of that at Pharma, doing advocacy and public policy. So they decided to let Paul open up a shop. Daniel was already there doing lobbying, and they gave us a decent budget. And Daniel and Paul were like, all right, this is kind of on all of us to see if we can impact some change and at least start to articulate better who Intuit is to policymakers, because you hear TurboTax and you've heard of Mint and but a lot of people don't know that Intuit owns both of them, and they now own MailChimp, which obviously you and a lot of other people in the creative space understand, but they don't know the impact that the company has around the United States, and particularly in the UK, as we've been able to work over there. And there's huge economic impact and a lot of success stories. And so it was just starting slowly to kind of build out this repository of really good creative that they could share with policymakers to help them understand the importance of this company. And then it's grown, and we've done some really neat stuff in the UK. We got to work with them on a decent sized campaign over there, kind of the same thing, to get in front of Parliament. Helped them with, an event that they co-hosted with Politico, with some trade representatives from the UK. Just really neat stuff, but born out of relationships that we already had with these individuals. And again, nice people we love to work with, and that's kind of the sweet spot for us. So it's exciting work, and quite frankly, one of our favorite clients.
What about, I want to talk about Meta and what you do with Meta. And, at some of those events, are you allowed to bring sword swallowers, or is that prohibited?
We're hosting an event with Meta next week, but it's on safety, so I don't think that would be very
That'd be perfect. Perfect intro.
Yeah.
What did you do with Meta?
Yeah, Meta has been a long-standing client of ours, they have been a tremendous partner. The team that we work with on the public policy side are incredibly smart. As you can imagine, Meta has attracted some really amazing talent. And it's an example of a true partnership where we were brought in on a very, very small scale. The first project we got with them was to review their public policy collateral. So anything they were using to present, to showcase, whether it be a one-pager or a PowerPoint presentation or an educational seminar on Meta tools with Facebook or Instagram, that they were using across the globe. I think it was 65 different offices at the time. That they were using on a policy level. So whether it was meeting with a member of parliament or staff for a member of Congress here in the US, we did a review of all of it. And they had an issue where a lot of this was being produced really rapidly across the globe. And there wasn't sort of this nexus that brought it all together. And so our relationship started there. We went in, realized you've got really amazing content, but there's no strong cohesive brand to bring it all together. And I'd say the one thing that we have focused on with just about all of our clients is driving a cohesive brand. And in the public policy space, public affairs space, a lot of times in government affairs, a lot of times those teams are very separate from the corporate marketing teams or even the corporate comms teams. And so their resources towards creative are usually limited. And so they're off sort of a little bit on their own. And we're brought in to bring that creative edge to their world. And so in the case of Meta, our work with them snowballed, and we helped them to develop everything from global economic reports, where we're helping to tie together hundreds of pages of economic resources to help to tell the story of how Meta's tools across Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram are helping small businesses, and what that impact is in the UK, what it is in Europe, what it is in APAC region, et cetera, and then helping to distill that down to tell the story on a congressional district by district level. What is the impact of a major corporation like Meta on a smaller group of individuals, and hyper focused, localized content that will make sense to someone living in Idaho or to someone living in Singapore. And those are very different audiences. And so part of what we have done with Meta as we have grown is we have had to become experts in localization, and we've got some tremendous partners. Friedman in the UK is a fabulous localization translation firm that we've worked with for years. And our team works alongside them to make sure that our creative and the copy all match up perfectly for every piece of collateral and content that we're creating, both in the Meta world and for a lot of our other clients as well. The nuances that we now deal with on a daily basis, are things like the color of clothing on an illustrated individual on the cover of a report in Hong Kong and in New York or in Belgium, and you name it. That individual who's on the cover needs to look a certain way, needs to be culturally appropriate, needs to fit in with the environment that we're trying to showcase this content. And then the copy also has to be nuanced. You can't just translate a piece of content and think it's going to work locally in Brussels, and translate just the same in Paris. So that's become a huge part of the work that we do with Meta. But we're also, we're the agency that sort of ties a bow on all of their public policy work, or a lot of it. And we've been successful mainly because we've had such a strong relationship with the client. And we take their lead, and they take our lead on when our expertise is really, what they're looking for. We're there to support them, and vice versa. There's nobody who's a better expert on Meta than our Meta clients. And so, having that collaboration on a second by second basis is pretty critical. And I'd say that's the same across the board with all of our clients.
I'm going to have Josh, I want you to talk about in a second, we were talking before we hit record, how some of the public policy has helped various groups, but specifically female entrepreneurs. And before we get into that, how did they even find you? Right? It seems so random for them to, hey, can you look over this collateral? How did Facebook find you?
I can't use specific names, although I'm very tempted, because the agency that recommended us, it was an agency out of DC we worked adjacent with for pharma. They just didn't want the work because it wasn't a huge budget, to be frank. So they just rattled off a few other firms that they knew could do it and that they trusted. And this is a well-respected larger agency. And so we got a phone call to our front office, which rarely happens. And thank goodness somebody answered it. And they were like, somebody's like, yeah, somebody's calling from
This
Facebook.
Is Mark Zuckerberg. You're like, yeah, right. Yeah. Hangs up.
And so we just assumed it was something like, it's like their ads team or something, like, because we're an agency, we get these calls, right? Hey, are you effectively using our platform? And we're like, okay. So we call back and we're like, oh, this actually might be something. And like, how many thousands of firms were called? Come to find out, not many. We had an initial kickoff call or video with them, and we just got along with the three of them on the video so well. And it was initially a very small tiny project. And Nathan's right. We were trying to figure out cohesively how they could kind of bring all these assets together globally and standardize their brand. And we did that to a certain degree, but they were so excited to work with us that we barely even got to finish that report before we were just knee deep in everything else. And so essentially this other firm that recommended us really lost out, because it could have been an open door to something else.
Well, it just proves
Yeah.
like adding value and smaller projects lead to demonstrating value and showing and gaining that trust in the relationship. And it can start small, right?
It can, and that's how we built a business. I mean, brick by brick. There was times where Nathan and I would look at each other and be like, all right, we've heard this once, we've heard it 1,000 times. Like, the budget's small, but if we can do this right, it'll be bigger. And you can kind of smell that out now as a larger agency, and we have the benefit of kind of knowing when to take that leap and when not to. But yeah, you're right. Like, those projects pay dividends, and that's how we built the business. Like, it's not like we opened the public side of NJI and all of a sudden the Metas of the world were knocking on our door. I would love to think that that's how it works, but that is far from the truth.
And I mentioned the female entrepreneurs. How does that relate to Meta?
So they asked us, it was part of APAC programming, that they were doing a conference and Sheryl Sandberg was running it. And we had already done the collateral for Sheryl, and a lot of the presentation materials. And they thought it would be a good opportunity to bring together. They had done these, a lot of smaller videos with female entrepreneurs, and told the story of them. We had also worked with them during the pandemic to send out video kits and train them during the quarantine, to kind of help continue to grow their business, because everybody was, it was a little different, but Facebook was still a huge platform, especially for these small entrepreneurs, and female. And so we put together a video package and other collateral that really kind of shed light on all the amazing women around the globe that had built these successful businesses because of Meta and Facebook products, and using the tools that is available on platforms like Facebook. And quite frankly, they would say, like, I wouldn't have a business had it not been for the ability to do this on Facebook. And they allowed to tell their stories, and they focused on females because Sheryl was running the program. And it was wonderful. Like, working on that kind of project is just, it's kind of a once in a lifetime, incredible way to kind of flex what we do. And our team loved it. It was wildly successful, and it's still one of the proudest projects that I've personally ever worked on.
To go full circle for a second, one of your first clients, I thought it'd be fun. I was looking through your page. I'll bring it up here in a second. And I was, a couple organizations and companies stuck out to me. So I'm right now on the njimedia.com/work page, and the National Beer Wholesalers Association stuck out to me because I just feel like it was, we have Home Depot, we have Intuit, we have Meta, and then we have the National Beer Wholesalers Association. So
it's a fun one. And NBWA is a trade association, which, like many of our clients, they're representing a larger group of businesses across the country. And as you can imagine, in the alcohol industry at large, there are a lot of policy related issues, and they represent their constituency here in DC. And on a state level as well, but really, really fun client. They're not only, like many of our clients, their team is great to work with, and we've been working with them for almost 15 plus years. And it's a really good example of a relationship where our services have evolved tremendously over the last 15 years. But our knowledge of the industry is obviously significant 15 years later. And so we've become really close partners with them. But I remember day one when I got a call from Rebecca Spicer, who was someone that I worked with previously, and she asked how we could be helpful, and we immediately jumped in, and our goal was to provide some immediate value to them. Budget wasn't huge, but we dove in, and our goal was to put some points on the board early on to showcase that, really good creative could be instrumental to the success of their communications team, and the communications initiatives that they were embarking upon, and then using great digital comm strategies to tell their stories to policymakers and the media. And that's also a really good example of a client. Rebecca Spicer is no longer with National Beer Wholesalers and is now at Airlines for America, the airline trade association. And we went through a competitive process to then be brought over to Airlines for America as well. And she she recommended us because she had worked with us, but she sort of removed herself from the process of finding an agency or approving one because she had a relationship with us. But again, we've now worked for A4A Airlines for over 5 years, and done some really tremendous work there. And again, another really strong trade association that also has a challenging environment to work in. And we're using great creative to help them create content and create stories that are more impactful.
First of all, Josh, Nathan, I just want to say thank you. This has been fantastic, and I love hearing your journey and learning more about what you do. If people have questions or they want to learn more, they can go to njimedia.com to learn more and check out more episodes of the podcast. And I just want to be the first one to thank you both, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.